Welcome into Rover Sports, and we are live, and we got another special guest joining us on this Monday night. It is Garrett Jones. He's down in Houston, Texas. And Garrett, this is your first time on Rover Sports. How are you? And how's your week going?
Yeah, good. Thanks for having me on. I'm super impressed with Rover so far. I think you guys got a really good thing going, so I'm super glad to get to be a part of it. And yeah, I'm good. Week just started. I've been very fortunate to actually be able to keep my job. So my quarantine experience was really short, but I feel really thankful to have this job and a position and just another good day of work.
Yeah, exactly. And during this time, I know some people are doing golf. I know that there was golf on, there's horse racing. There's not a ton on, but we still have football maybe to look forward to in a couple of months. And you are from the University of Missouri, so you got to go there. And then, so were you there when Drew Lock was a sophomore? Were you a freshman at Missouri?
Oh yeah, yep. That's exactly the way that it went. And funny enough, I actually knew where I was going when I was a senior in high school. So I followed Drew Lock all 4 years of his career. I remember watching Mizzou's first game in 2015 very excitedly and getting to see him make his debut. And the broadcasters, the kind of just general media brass were like, this is a kid that Mizzou is really excited about. He's clear Missouri blood. His dad played at Mizzou. His grandfather played at Mizzou. He was born in Columbia. The kid was literally born to be a Tiger, and the team was so excited about him. And he played well in his first game. Unfortunately for him, he was kind of thrown into the fire his freshman season when he really should have redshirted. But after that, his sophomore, junior, and senior seasons, especially that junior season, were incredible.
Yeah, I agree with you about the junior year because Josh Heupel kind of unleashed the offense to Drew Lock. And so junior year, though, he did have some games where he really struggled in the middle portion of his junior year. The team struggled. I think they went to the Swamp and LSU, and those were two really rough patches. What do you remember about that junior year and then towards the back half of the junior year? I want to talk about that kind of switch that the Missouri football team underwent in the back half of the of junior year.
Well, it's funny. His junior year kind of encapsulated something that was a storyline his entire career, literally until November. Mizzou, under Barry Odom and Drew Lock, they had this just agonizing narrative that they could really beat up on the little guys. I mean, we're talking 79-0 over Delaware State. We're talking, huge blowout wins over Vanderbilt. But when they get anybody worth their salt, Lock was just really, really struggling, and the team would ultimately lose. And that held him down, unfortunately, through his junior year. And the team started 1-5 his junior year. He really picked it up after, he had nobody really knew what to make of him through the first 6 games because he goes out and throws 7 touchdowns, which was a program record in his first game, but it's against an FCS school in Missouri State. And Missouri puts 72 on the board in that game. So nobody really knows what to take of that. Team starts 1-5, but they turn it around with 6 straight wins. They ultimately go to the Texas Bowl and play University of Texas. And what do you know? It's pretty good Tom Herman defense. And the offense is just eaten alive. So through his junior and sophomore year, the narrative was very much alive that, this guy can really put up the numbers on some bad teams, but anybody rolls around that's worth their salt, and he just puts up questionable performances.
Yeah, and I get the second half, the season really changed, I think, when they went to Georgia in that first half. And that's really where you saw Drew Lock kind of uncork the deep balls to Jamon Moore, and there was another Emmanuel Hall, too, that other receiver. So Drew Lock, the deep ball, the deep balls that Drew Lock would throw, I mean, he's one of the most talented college passers that I've ever seen play. I mean, the throw to the little guy in the Kentucky game, he still had those tremendous throws. And even though I'm not even sure that they ended up winning that game that year, but Drew Lock against Georgia in the first half, he kind of re-encapsulated the magic. And then they benefited from having some coaches that were on their last leg. They got to get the Florida coach Jim McElwain on the last leg at Missouri. Yeah, McElwain, and then a really impressed. I think Tennessee, or was Tennessee the senior year? I'm trying to think.
No, Tennessee was a junior. They won that game 50-17 the week after playing a limping Florida team that was coached by Randy Shannon, who's now at UCF. So yeah, they got a reputation as, you're right, coach killers among the lowly of the SEC that year.
Exactly. So we're looking at Missouri and Drew Lock, and yeah, that Texas game was just massively disappointing. He did have he did have the greatest throw maybe of his career when he put that ball in the bucket in the first half. You being from Texas, you didn't go to Texas. That game must have been personal for you.
Yeah, funny enough, I actually broadcast that game at Reliance Stadium where I now live. So looking back on it, that game just means a lot to me personally. But yeah, there's no love lost for the University of Texas in my mind. My dad graduated from Texas A&M, so naturally I kind of grew up not exactly seeing UT in the best light. And then that game, I mean, Tom Herman and the whole mockery thing on the sidelines, that really upset me up there in the broadcast booth. I had to kind of dial it back and realize that I'm trying to be an objective third party here. But yeah, that was really
You're ready to go down there and handle Herman yourself.
I just thought it was such a terrible look. You know, Tom's really got to reel that stuff back this year. I mean, he's got to walk the straight and narrow this year. I mean, both on and off the field. Like that guy better watch that. The coach's seat in Austin can turn burnt orange and hot pretty quickly, right?
Yeah.
Charlie Strong.
Oh yeah, that offense. With Tom Herman, the Maryland games for sure. Tom Herman, yeah, he definitely has that edge to him, that kind of cocky edge to him, and then he tries to paint the image like he's just the good old boy. So the thing is about Herman is that he did have he does have some moments where he tries to fire up his team. He has some good quotes in there, but the Drew Lock thing, I really thought that was over the top. I do like college coaches, though, having personalities.
Yeah,
I do like
definitely.
the Spurriers. I like the people that you can kind of hate on a little bit. So, but Herman, in that regard, that was definitely a motivating factor when you looked at Missouri that one game.
Oh yeah, no question. His team won the game. You know, that was a close game going into halftime. Like you said, I'll really never forget that Drew Lock rainbow out of the gate in the second half. I mean, that was just a perfect ball to Jamon Moore. It was Jamon Moore or Jonathan Johnson, one of the two. I think it was Jonathan Johnson,
the little guy.
Yeah, it was 80 yards. And then sure enough, they forced the 3 and out. They've got a chance to draw within the score. And then what do you know? Terrible snap, ball goes out of the back of the end zone for a safety, and Missouri never even comes close in that game again. But yeah, it was still a great experience. And like you said, it was really personal for me. But, that year was just, everybody walked away from that year is like, okay, that's it for Locke. Like what a year, you know what I mean? What a year for him to come back, throw 44 touchdowns, set the SEC single season passing record that would only be broken by Joe Burrow 2 years later, which is pretty funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was a year where everybody was like, okay, they put together 6 wins and Locke broke some records. We should walk away pretty satisfied.
Yeah, so the thing I'm going to ask you now is that, so you went to most of these away games to watch Missouri, actually? Like you got to do like play-by-play?
That was only just a handful. So I went to Alabama in 2018 and I went to Georgia in 2019. Those were really the only road games I got to make. But I did go to the Texas Bowl as a postseason game. So I got a good trio in my time in school.
Georgia in 20. Well, that was the game, right, where Locke had the first half that we talked about. The 28.
So this was Georgia this past year. So it was the 27-0 Bulldog win.
I gotcha. Right, and that was a real rain-filled affair. Yeah. if I was going to remember.
Yeah, it was ugly.
Going back to Locke, at times he would be a little frustrating because I think that Drew Lock, in terms of the talent, in terms of the kid, I certainly rooted for Locke, and he has that infectious personality. The throws against Arkansas might have been the best game he ever played was at Arkansas, like the back shoulder throws from like 20 yards out. So it was always entertaining to watch Drew Lock play. But there's a handful of games where the killer instinct, I questioned him going to the NFL. So a killer instinct game would be against Kentucky. I know that we could talk about the pass interference for years and years on this show. That was one of the worst calls that you would see. But they had so many chances to put away Kentucky. They didn't do that year. Georgia. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
No. I was just going to say the most haunting thing about that game that Missouri fans, I mean, they are not going to forget this for years. With Mizzou, I don't want to get too far down the rabbit hole, but if anybody's familiar with the program at all, versus Colorado, a team that went on to win the national championship, that really cost Mizzou in the 1990s. You had the kicked ball against Nebraska. This team just has haunting individual moments, and I promise you that Missouri fans are adding that pass interference call to the lexicon. But really the most harrowing thing about that game was Missouri did not record a first down at all in the second half. And they had a lead. It was 13-3, and they ended up losing that game by a score at the end of it. So you're right. You're absolutely right. You wonder, okay, where's the killer instinct in this guy, right? If your coach is going to be so conservative, who Barry Odom was calling plays at that point, if your coach and offensive coordinator Derek Dooley are going to be so conservative and keep this so by the belt, where's the playmaking ability, right? Where's the ability to dump out of a play and make it happen yourself? Where's that Russell Wilson archetype in this guy? And, he's not Russell Wilson for sure. But, you wonder, okay, you're seeing that in Trevor Lawrence, right? Look at him in the college football playoff against Ohio State. He busts off a 50-yard plus run. Where was that in Drew Lock in that game? You wonder, okay, the defense has got me right now. I'm going to try to make something happen with my feet. And he is not the most fleet of foot. I always joke that he looked like a baby giraffe when he tried to run. But, you wonder where that instinct and that ability was in a game like that, especially when you put up a big fat 0 as far as first downs in the second half. So I absolutely understand where you're coming from there.
Yeah, so a couple of other games now that I have time to gather my thoughts, and I'm thinking because there's a handful, and I would watch a lot of Missouri football. The game against Georgia at home his senior year, I mean, the defense was okay for a little bit, and then Georgia just kind of blew it open. But Drew Lock, maybe this was just the Derek Dooley offense, but Alabama the last 3 quarters, and really Georgia, though, it almost seemed like Drew Lock was sick that game. There was just no emotion from Drew Lock. Like, there was such a difference between the game when he went to West Lafayette, when he went to Purdue. That was a really fun game with Drew Lock. Tons of emotion. He came back. He took the team down and won one of his most impressive wins. But then the game against Georgia, there was no pop. Even though the team was close and you were at that stadium, there was no explosive plays from Derek or Drew, and Drew wouldn't even throw the ball deep in that game.
Yeah, it was strange. It's so hard to believe that Mizzou actually had a lead in that game. They led after 1, and there was just kind of a feeling that, okay, this might be happening. Now, that being said, you look at the Kentucky game in 2018, and everybody kind of looks at it with an asterisk just because that there's just something that's going to go wrong, because that's just the way that kind of the fan base genuinely feels. It's a pretty lethargic, very feels like they've been cursed fan base. And that attitude was definitely prevailing in that game. But you're right. If Drew Lock animates the offense, if he's fired up, if he's got his head locked in, like you said, adding that extra energy, maybe things change. And there were a lot of questionable plays in that game. There were a lot of questionable play calls. I don't know if you remember, there was a play where Holloway caught a wide open touchdown for Georgia, and then clearly, according to replay, dropped the ball ahead of the pylon, but they didn't have a good enough angle. They didn't have anything definitive to prove it. So if that ball ends up being a touchback, Mizzou gets the ball back down 1 or 2 scores. I can't remember at that point. That game's completely different. But you're right. The thing that really could have changed it was some more energy on his part. So, yeah, that game always felt out of hand once Mizzou went down, because they never took the lead after they went down in the second.
We're talking about the negatives. I assure you it is going to get positive, Garrett. Garrett Jones joining us here on Rover Sports, and we're talking too about our own podcasting network. This is the debut podcast. So the Oklahoma State bowl game, it just seemed like Drew Lock, tribute to Missouri. It just seemed like they were kind of happy to be there. Let's put up some points. it didn't like crawl at him losing that game in Memphis. What do you think about that bowl, the last game of Drew Lock?
I think maybe it did a little bit. I think it was kind of emotional for him because, like I said, he was born in Columbia. His dad played at Missouri. His grandfather played at Missouri. Just knowing that was going to be the last time he ever suited up in a Tiger uniform, I think that held a lot of emotional charge. And they really wanted to win that game. That was a season where, in case you don't remember, you're a snap away from losing, only 2 snaps away, really, from only losing to Georgia and Alabama. Right, with the 10-2 with those 2 losses, that's about as impressive of a resume as a 2-loss team in the country. But obviously, the Kentucky game happens; it all unfolds after that. They also had a really good win over Florida, and I mentioned that kind of that huge faux pas in Lock's win on the road against quality teams.
Yep,
well,
I mean, Florida and Tennessee I was also going to mention that too.
Those were the 2 biggest wins in his career. So you take all that and you digest that, and you're at the end of the season. So yeah, they felt like they could have got a really better bowl. They felt like they could have been in contention for the SEC East, but nonetheless, things fall apart. You lose those 2 games you probably shouldn't have, and what do you know? You're in a position where you're 8-4. You're playing up against an Oklahoma State team where Mike Gundy's always got his team in a good position to win, no matter what their record is. But really, I thought that Mizzou was actually punching down in that. I thought that they easily would have an opportunity to pick up their 9th win. But Oklahoma State really came to play like they always do under Mike Gundy. And, it's funny, we were talking about the killer instinct. Locke actually tried to make a play with his feet in what turned out to be his last ever snap as a Missouri Tiger. The team had the ball inside the Oklahoma State red zone, and on a 4th down play, everything just kind of fizzled away, and he had to try to make it with his feet, and he couldn't. So that was not the best way for him to go into the NFL in my mind. I thought that would really draw back some scouts, and maybe it did. He slips to the 2nd round in Denver, but yeah, that's not the way that I thought that his tenure would end. I thought that he would walk it off with the touchdown and walk it off with the win, but I do think that might resonate with him a little bit. I obviously can't speak on his behalf, but I do think that might resonate with him a little bit.
Yeah, and I still
obviously with the way his rookie season went.
Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt. I still thought Locke in that game put on a show. And he still had the big throws up the sidelines. And so in the NFL now, you put Drew Lock with even more talent in Denver. And Drew Lock just has this ability to put the team together. I mean, everybody is going to – a lot of people are going to remember the end of Pinkel, and it's kind of sad that Pinkel had like that as the end tenure there. With the team and with the whole protest going on at the university. But Locke seemed to keep the team together, and he even recited that at the combine. So it seems like Drew Lock, being the quarterback of the Denver Broncos, kind of living in Texas, living in the middle of the United States, how big the Broncos brand is. It seems like Drew Lock is totally capable of that role, and that he's just a cool customer.
Yeah, no doubt. No doubt, because what Denver knew when they were getting in Drew Lock is somebody who's loyal, right? I mean, even out of the gate, you open up his recruiting in 2015. He's got interest from Tennessee under Butch Jones. He's got interest from Ohio State, very interest, and he'd be pretty low on the depth chart starting there.
Jim Harbaugh.
Oh my gosh, you think about that quarterback room if he would have ended up there around the same time as Burrow and Haskins, and my goodness, that would have been quite a trio there. But, obviously he realizes that, and that makes Missouri more attractive for him. But even after 2015, you got players transferring left and right. Pinkel retires. You got the opportunity to transfer and probably get immediate eligibility. And he's got some suitors. Teams in the Big 12 want him. I'm sure somebody else in the SEC would take a pass on him. But he chooses to stay. And you flash forward 2 years, he sets all kinds of program records, sets the SEC record for passing touchdowns in a season. And he chooses to come back. Now that was a wise decision, because if he would have come out of the 2018 NFL draft, it's probably a much different story to where he was drafted in 2019. I'm thinking probably a 5th or 6th, maybe a 7th, even a 7th round pick in 2018 compared to 2019. So that ended up being for his advantage. But the point still remains, right? He was loyal to the team. He knew that they could put something together senior year. It didn't end up working that way, but he knew that was going to come. So my bottom line there is John Elway knew early on that he got a guy who, once he came into that culture, right, once he bought into the program, once he established himself there, he was joined at the hip. So I think that was very attractive for Denver. And you see that in year one, the cohesion that he brought to a team that was struggling at the beginning of the year. I mean, Joe Flacco, Super Bowl MVP, sure. I mean, Super Bowl champion, very good quarterback. Definitely a Baltimore Ravens Hall of Famer, maybe a fringe Hall of Famer. That's gonna be quite a debate over the next couple of years. Let me tell you something.
You think Flacco and the Hall of Fame? I agree with you, but people are so down on Flacco because of the mediocrity and because of Lamar Jackson.
Right. And not to knock him even further, but in 2019, that team has no cohesion. Right. Joe Flacco's just not even into it. In my opinion, at least. I can't speak for him, obviously.
Well, you remember that great quote when he's like, our team's not playing the win. Remember he called out the offensive coordinator? Like that was just a shot. That was like a suicide mission there from Joe Flacco.
Right. And so Locke steps in and he has that effect to like bring a group together. And I see what John Elway saw in him early on. And I think it panned out in his rookie year. And you look at the stat line, it's something that's going to jump off the chart, but it proved something that you go back 2 years ago, people were questioning whether he can make the NFL at all. He clearly did, even in a short sample size.
Yeah, and the time off like maybe helped him. A lot of rookies recite that if they have time off due to not playing in whatever facet, it's blessings in disguise, like some injuries that happen. But for Denver, he certainly now has an opportunity. We're going to wrap up the Drew Lock, and then I am going to talk about the current state of Missouri football, maybe a little more college football here. We have Garrett Jones on this podcast. Garrett, when you look at Drew Lock, though, he had these last 4 games very good. I think you might have been living in Houston at the time when that was just so much fun to watch, unless you're a Houston Texans fan. When he went down the Reliant and he just balled out in the first half, it was such an impressive show. So the one thing I'm going to say is, what did you think of Drew ending the year? And this next question, I want you to analyze this. Do you think that we're placing too much expectation on Locke because of Jerry Jeudy, because of the kid from Penn State, KJ Hamler, because of how good Cortland Sutton was from the Dallas area, Noah Fant? Do you think right now Drew Lock, you think we're putting too much on Drew Lock right now?
Well, also, don't forget one of his good buddies, Albert Okwuegbunam, former Missouri Tiger. Those two linked up for a lot of touchdowns, especially in that record-shattering season. Okwuegbunam came out of nowhere in 2017. I mean, absolutely nowhere. Redshirted in 2016. Wasn't highly recruited, was more of a basketball player in high school, and then boom, just explodes on the scene. 11 touchdowns, leads tight end nationally, first team All-SEC. I mean, that guy was truly a diamond in the rough for Missouri. I think he can be the same thing for Denver. But more importantly for Locke, he is a safety blanket. I mean, that guy is hard to bring down. He is hard for a linebacker to cover. So Locke's pretty much always going to have an option when Okwuegbunam's on the field. Now, the challenge there is that he's got to win that job. Jake Butt is still there. Herman's still there. You still got just a great tight end pool, obviously led by Noah Fant, who was Denver's first-round pick the year they took Locke. So it's going to be hard for Okwuegbunam to make it on the field. Now, what you said with Jeudy, with KJ Hamler, so many weapons in Denver, Cortland Sutton, those two already established chemistry in the field in 2019. I mean, the sky is shining bright for the Denver offense. I mean, you got Phillip Lindsay, another diamond in the rough. I'm so impressed with the way that they've drafted over the past 3 years and the way that they've been able to find talent in rough places. And I think that there are only good things incoming for Drew Lock. But to answer your question, I do worry about the sophomore slump with him. I really do. Now, that being said, the biggest issue for him in 2017, 2018 was obviously never the deep ball, right? He can take the top off of a defense so easily. He's not that bad in the intermediate game. Obviously, that was a lot of where he and Okwuegbunam worked together. But this is so counterintuitive, right, to what you would think. He struggled so much in the short passing game. I mean, any kind of slant, any kind of screen, any kind of check down, his accuracy was just notably different. That was the biggest thing that I noted in a very, very limited sample of watching him in the NFL. Somebody got to him. Somebody got to him. I don't know if it was the quarterback coach in Denver, offensive coordinator. I can't put a name out there right now. somebody got to him and identified that in his game and helped him fix that, because there was more zing on the short range passes for him than I had ever seen at Missouri. Now, that gives me a little more comfort in thinking that he's not going to have a sophomore slump, but I do worry about him putting together the Baker Mayfield phenomenon, right? Where, statistically, it's nothing great, but statistically, it's not good by any means. I think I could see a season where he kind of matches his touchdowns and interception ratio. I could definitely see that coming. Now, that being said, I could also see him putting up a huge step in year 2, not unlike Mahomes. He's obviously not going to get to the Mahomes ceiling. His ceiling's not quite there, but I could see him taking a big step forward in year 2. I could also see him putting together that kind of mediocre season. The one thing I can't see is everything just going disastrously, right? I mean, like, barring injury, barring some kind of strange, pandemic related situation, I don't think that there's any kind of way that he could find himself in a point where he's regressing. So, that's a very long-winded way of saying that I do think that he's going to end up as some kind of plus player for Denver next year.
Yeah, and I mean, Locke, I think that there's some people that rooted against Locke in the process because he's a more interesting quarterback to interview than a lot of people. I think that he's very honest with how he is. I think that he's very likable in that sense. But he's a big-armed quarterback, and when you're a big-armed quarterback, actually, you actually kind of have a target on your back in the draft process, because you almost get mocked, like, oh, you're Kyle Bowler, you're Jamarcus Russell. Yeah. You're just going to have a big arm. They'll even look at the Brett Rippins or the Easton Sticks of the world, the little guy that could like run around and say, this guy's underrated because he's smart. He doesn't have the big arm, So when you're a big guy with a big arm, it really can be a negative thing for you almost in the NFL.
Yeah, and that's so strange because that's really counterintuitive, right? I mean, the quarterback position in the NFL is the most single important position in sports, in my opinion. And, it's funny when you look down the archetypes of the guys who have really succeeded. Obviously, all of them have incredible deep range throws, but the big thing is deep range accuracy, right? I mean, Mahomes has got that. Mahomes obviously is a cannon, but he's got the deep range accuracy. Breeze has that. Brady has that. Manning has that. Rodgers has that. All the names you've got on the list, they've got that. Now, that was a big question for Locke. They knew he had the cannon of an arm. They knew he had the deep range, but the accuracy was definitely a question. So I think you're right. That definitely led up against him and kind of butt up against him in the draft process. So
I see where you're coming from. The thing about Locke is now he has Pat Shermer, and as a Giants fan, I had to watch Pat Shermer's offense for 3 years. I think Shermer's very much like Derek Dooley in the sense that they're both nice guys. They definitely get opportunities a lot. And Dooley's offense was very conservative. It was like almost nothing like Heupel's. Now they really ran the football, and Locke really bought into the Dooley system. But I could see Derek Dooley and Shermer being alike, and that's where if you look at him fantasy-wise, or you look at him with all these weapons now, I'm just not sure the fireworks are going to come. I just have never been a Shermer guy. I think the Case Keenum year is a little bit, kind of it really is almost like a storybook with Shermer. So I'm fascinated to see how this older coaching staff of Fangio and Shermer is going to put this thing together for the Denver Broncos.
Yeah, and I was really glad that Locke performed so well in year 1 because of the comments that Vic Fangio had early in the season, right? I mean, he was Locke's biggest critic out of the gate. He was not going to make anything easy for him. And I was really glad to see him succeed because he certainly has to at least have his attention, if not his favorite at this point. But, it's funny you bring up Pat Shermer. When I think about the Shermer offense, I think of his son at Vanderbilt. Right. It's a lot of checkdowns. It's a lot of short range passing. Correct me if I'm wrong here. It's very conservative, milk the clock, not going to take any chances because it's probably going to be a deep shot that ricochets off the helmet of a safety and gets picked off, which definitely happened to him against Mizzou. That's what I think of when I think of the Pat Shermer offense. So I'll be curious to see how Locke kind of adapts with that. I think that he might be a little strong-headed and kind of take things into his own hand and still try to weave that deep range passing into his offensive gameplay. But I guess we'll see. Like you said, it'll be one of the more captivating, interesting offenses to watch next year in the NFL.
Yeah, we're talking here with Garrett Jones. Garrett Jones down in Houston, Texas. Garrett, I want to focus back on Missouri football. Towards the back half of last year with Barry Odom, like Odom, you know, he had the locker room, and you've probably interviewed Barry over his time, but I felt that, yeah, the offense just wasn't there. And if I'm going to go back to Missouri's, I think that Missouri actually lost to Vanderbilt, or they just had a brutal loss last year. There were certain games with Barry Odom and with Derek Dooley that you could just sense that there was maybe going to be change coming at the end of last season.
Yeah, I think it was more of Missouri and athletic director Jim Sterk kind of just wanted change. Odom wasn't Sterk's guy. Sterk was hired after Odom, interestingly. So that was something worth considering. But it's interesting. You look at the game before what ended up being Odom's last coaching appearance for Missouri. They played a kind of middle of the road Tennessee team, right? That was the same Tennessee team that started off with the loss to Georgia State at home, the same one that lost to BYU. Yeah. They rallied incredibly to go 7-3. I mean, Jeremy Pruitt has really, really turned it around there in Knoxville. That program has a lot of optimism, but still, I mean, terrible taste in your mouth with those two losses. If Odom wins that game, there is no chance he gets fired. I mean, no chance. You can't fire a coach 7-5 coming off an 8-5 year and a 7-6 year to where he rallied the team from going 1-5. You can't fire a guy like that. So I think that Sterk was actually really pleased he was able to make a change. I really like Eli Drinkwitz. He's already recruiting better than Odom in 1 year amid a pandemic. So, I mean, that tells you pretty much everything you need to know. Odom kind of had a reputation as the lethargic recruiter. A lot of the assistant coaches usually did that. At least that's my understanding. And there were some significant talent in the state of Missouri that wasn't staying within the state. I mean, you've automatically got a huge recruiting advantage as far as recruiting kids in your own state because you're the only Division I FBS school in the state. So that right there should be enough, let alone Power 5, to set yourself apart in the eye of in-state recruits. But for some reason, a lot of these kids were leaving for schools like Oklahoma, USC, even Illinois found its way to steal a couple recruits out of the state. They were leaving for Iowa, Texas. A lot of schools in Texas would come and sweep up some St. Louis and Kansas City talent. So that was a huge problem in the eyes of Jim Sterk. Eli Drinkwitz, who was hired from Appalachian State, in case you missed it from December, has already flipped the narrative. I mean, already. St. Louis and Kansas City kids are committing to Mizzou, and that was no doubt something that was really emphasized by the athletic director, Jim Sterk. So, yeah, you're right. The end of the season last year, especially, you start out 5-1, you get ranked for the first time in the Odom era, and then you just completely lay an egg against Vanderbilt. You don't score a point against Georgia. You score 6 against Florida. You even hobble a little bit against a lowly Arkansas team. I mean, the writing was on the wall that something had to change there. And if it wasn't going to be Derek Dooley in the offensive coordinator spot, it was definitely going to be Odom. And I think he kind of just found himself in a poor position on the chopping block. That being said, he really landed on his feet nicely. Arkansas defensive coordinator spot, a program on the rise under Sam Pittman, that's a good place to land. I think it's a really good fit for Barry Odom. And I already think the way that he was able to flip a lot of defensive recruits originally committed to Missouri and Arkansas shows that he can really, really do well as a position coach.
I agree with the Arkansas comment, especially because you also got the Missouri offensive line coach that is heading to Arkansas. Sam Pittman, the ultimate underdog. Lane Kiffin was rumored to go to Arkansas, but now I think Pittman is even more at home than Lane. So you get Lane going to Oxford, Mississippi. Missouri was in on Lane as well. So it was such a crazy recruiting cycle. Now, I'm going to be completely honest with you here on this podcast, kind of ruffle some feathers here with Garrett Jones. I'm not the biggest Drinkwitz fan in terms of the hire because I look at Appalachian State. Scott Satterfield had it rolling. Eli came in. He did do a great job. Eli is going to be fun. He's a great personality already for the SEC. He's going to be definitely goofy to some. People are going to make jokes about Drinkowitz, but he's going to be polarizing in that sense. So is he going to be Jim McElwain, or is he going to be a guy that's very dynamic? So he's bringing a new school feel to Missouri. That really, I think it's going to be incredibly interesting. I don't know about you, Garrett. I think it's boom or bust a little bit for Elijah Drinkowitz.
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt about that. I completely agree with you that he was coaching Scott Satterfield's team. And I mean, you look what he was able to do with his own team in year one at Louisville. You see how good of a coach Scott Satterfield is. I do think that Drinkwitz showed what he can do as far as in-game tactical management for sure in a conference championship season. I mean, that team goes on the road and beats two geographical FBS schools in North Carolina, who ended up winning a bowl game, in South Carolina, who went 4-8, probably had the toughest schedule in the country. Yeah, that's a lot better. That's probably the best 4-8 team in the country. They still beat them on the road in a giant stadium in Columbia, South Carolina. That's a landmark win for that program. And a lot of it was because of the tactician at the helm in Eli Drinkwitz. So I think Jim Sturck saw that. He saw how much the players in App State gravitated toward him. He saw the potential, which is the big thing. And if I were explaining the Drinkwitz hire like something using a metaphor, I don't know how many sports video games you play or how many our audience does. A lot of sports video games today have the metric where it'll show you if you're looking at a young player, especially let's just say MLB The Show, it'll give you their overall rating right now, and it'll give you their potential rating, right? So if Drinkwitz is a coach right now, his right now overall, I put him in like the 70s in the C range. But I think Jim Sturck sees that potential rating, and it's just through the roof. Like, it's an A+. I really do think that he's taking this and wants to say, all right, let's acquire this prospect right now. Let's develop him in our system, and let's see what kind of a coach he can turn into under our wing. Because we're not going to get him if he develops into a good coach in Appalachian State and ends up moving into that upper tier of coaches and clearly can do it on his own. Let's see if he can do it on his own in Missouri, in Columbia. He's got everything he needs to win here. If he's going to do it, he's going to be our guy. And I think he can move into that. And at least Sturck is saying, I'm going to take a vote of confidence, give you this opportunity. I think you can move into the next tier of coaches.
Yeah, I do look at that as a very good analogy. As they starting off low, the offense is explosive. It's going to be fast. It's going to be enjoyable for the fans. The real key is defensive coordinator is going to be huge. You can address that. And then I'm curious, because you're a college football fan, a rising star, like a guy that I really like, that I would take a risk on, is Will Healey from Charlotte. And I know that Mizzou was kind of in with Will Healey. And then if Will Healey was hired, Garrett, you could flip the argument. Oh, well, Scott Satterfield was, you could put the argument Satterfield was Eli Drinkowitz. But then you could look at Will Healey and said he had 1 year at the University of Charlotte. But I totally like hiring young. I totally understand that philosophy. Like, I think Kendall Briles, if you vet him, the Briles family, I think he could maybe be a really successful coach. Or I like starting young, like you said. So I know Will Healey was involved in the process. What did you know about Will Healey? And then what did you think about this defensive staff, though, of Drinkowitz now?
I was completely turned off to Will Healey at first. I saw 6-6 at Charlotte. Really? I mean, that did not click to me. I then researched Will Healey, and I was a complete fan. I totally got why Ole Miss was all over him. I get it that it was just too big of a risk for that program right now to pull the trigger on. I thought Mizzou was in a better position to take a chance on a guy like that, and I really do think it came down to those two for Missouri. I know Willie Fritz of Tulane was also an option, but I mean, he interviewed and said it was his dream job. He's a Central Missouri guy, but I think that was kind of just a courtesy interview for Missouri, if you will. I think it really came down to Will Healey and Eli Drinkwitz as the two finalists for Missouri. I love Will Healey. I want to apologize to him for being down on him early on. I mean, I love the energy that he brings. He's literally coaching an NCAA 14 dynasty in real life, right? I mean, he almost made a program for himself. I mean, you ask anybody over the age of 50 if there's a college football team called the Charlotte 49ers, they're probably saying no, right? They just don't know anything that in regards to their brain. He's literally playing NCAA 14 in real life and shaping that program by his very own hands. I think that they're going to be really good next year. I think they're going to be a 9-3 team. I think he's going to shoot right up the ladder and land in the Power 5 job next year. I think he's going to be a really good coach for a really long time.
I know.
Somebody's going to get this upstart 36-year-old, a guy that a lot of people like, that a lot of recruits are into. Maybe one day I'll look back and say, darn, I really wish Mizzou would have ended up pulling the trigger over Healey. I actually don't. Yeah. I think Drinkwitz is going to be a really good long-term hire for Mizzou.
I would have still went with Healey every day of the week because
I totally get it.
Because of club lit and because of the recruiting, and I just look at the upside there. And this Drinkwitz thing, I think that Drinkwitz I think he does have an edge to him. I think he's going to have to win, actually, with this kind of personality. I think he's going to have to prove people wrong. I think, Garrett, that he's actually going to be one of the villains of the SEC, and that's going to be fine. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I can see that. And it's so funny, he took opportunities before the pandemic, obviously everything. He took opportunities to get to know the Mizzou students on campus. And I mean, just a total personable guy with this kind of little Southern drawl and a very, small stature, glasses, kind of a normal haircut. He's got very much the average guy looking look going on for him. If he goes out in Columbia right now, he's definitely going to get recognized by some hardcore Mizzou fans, but there's still going to be enough people to where he can probably walk down the aisle in a grocery store and be unbothered. I don't think that'll last very long. I think that's the way it is right now. But yeah, I definitely see that. I mean, you're on the field, you see videos of him in coaching on the field and in the locker room. He's a fiery, passionate guy. So I definitely see that capability for him to turn into that kind of villain mold in the Southeastern Conference.
In terms of the SEC, what teams do you think are going to overachieve just in the East? What teams are overachieving? What teams are going to disappoint in this year and in the next coming years in the SEC East?
I like Tennessee. And trust me, there's been no bigger Tennessee skeptic over the past couple of years. I've always been on them when they get the preseason hype. ESPN, the SEC network, the Vol fans, they want them to be good. I get it. I know why. They are one of the most nostalgic teams in college football. But under Butch Jones, even further on before him, I just wouldn't believe it until I saw it. And sure enough, it just never really materialized. I mean, even the Pittman team in 2016, they couldn't get over the hump. And I think
they lost to South Carolina. Yep.
And I think that last year was the first true sign of them buying into something and getting over some adversity. I mean, that team easily could have quit and rode out a 2-10 season after losing those first two games, losing the two non-conference games. You maybe win one game in the SEC. They didn't. They rallied, man. And I was super impressed by that. And the thing that's really sold me on them now is just the way that they've recruited the past month or so. I mean, in case you quarantine has kept you out of college football recruiting, if you're watching this right now, go check out Tennessee's 24/7, because since late March, early April, Jeremy Pruitt has been using this pandemic to his advantage, man. They got the ball rolling. A couple of recruits come off the cuff, and soon enough, they've got the number 2 recruiting class in the nation. So I've been super impressed with the way that they do that. This year, I do think that Georgia is a bit of a flight risk in that they could possibly disappoint. That being said, disappointing for them is definitely going to be 9-3. You know what I mean? I like Jamie Newman a lot. I like what he did at Wake Forest, but I don't think that he's the kind of gamer that Jake Fromm is. I think that if Fromm comes back his senior year, you can easily pencil them in for at least 10 wins with the potential to win the East again. But with Newman, I think you're taking a rather large gamble there at quarterback until he really gets settled in. That being said, he's got a really high ceiling, and he's somebody who you can totally see somebody tells you right now, hey, Jamie Newman's going to be a Heisman finalist, I would say, yeah, I understand that. Obviously, their offense is more, founded around the run. But like I said, the quarterback's the most important position in sports. So I could see Georgia taking a step back. I really think that Florida's going to win the division next year. I think Missouri's going to check in at about 6-6. I don't know what to make it Vanderbilt at this point. I think that they could contend for a bowl game, kind of like they did in 2018. The rest of the conference, the way it's shaking out. South Carolina, probably going to improve. You question Will Muschamp moving forward. I do think that they'll be better than 4-8. So yeah, that division is going to have a lot of eyes on it next year, especially with some of the cross conference games.
Yeah. So in terms of kind of analyzing the SEC East myself, I look actually at Jake Fromm differently than you, and that's good. We can have a generic kind of disagreement. I think Jake Fromm was actually on his way out in Georgia. Yeah. I think that the fan base was tired of him checking down. They were tired of no big plays in the passing game. They look at Jacob Eason and more to an extent Justin Fields as just Justin Fields was really the guy that let them that really got away. And if Justin would have even went to the championship game, they would have just been kicking themselves. That's why you saw the offensive coordinator fired. They bring in the guy Todd Monken from Southern Miss and Cleveland to kind of have that more aerial-like attack. I do think Newman is a little bit overrated, like you're saying. A guy that is very underrated, and this could be like the next coming of a Carson Wentzian season, is Kyle Trask. I look at Kyle Trask at Florida. He could be a top 5 pick in this year's draft. He just has that stature. He has a tremendous story where he didn't start a high school game. The defense with Todd Grantham is going to be fun to watch. They are boomer bust, like on third down. They always will bring the house. So you look at Florida in that regard. South Carolina, I think that Will Muschamp's actually recruited well. They got a good quarterback recruit. They got a 5-star kid in Birch. So South Carolina, and that's a very tough place to win. But looking at then the rest of the East, I've never been a Derek Mason. Derek Mason, I just think his time is up at Vanderbilt. Kentucky with Mark Stoops, I think he is overrated. A lot of people think he's extremely underrated, but that offense never really had pop or sizzle. And then Missouri still got some time to wait. So Tennessee, though, Garrett, when you look at Tennessee and Jeremy Pruitt, the recruiting is definitely going to keep him there, but I'm not going to be on board with you about Jeremy Pruitt yet. I have to see more games, because if I'm going to nitpick Tennessee, and I know a lot of Tennessee people, last year, let's look at Tennessee's big wins. They end up beating Missouri. They get smashed by Florida and Georgia. What were the other teams that they beat? They beat a backup quarterback in Kentucky. They beat a lot of backups last year, Garrett. That's the one thing I was
impressed with. I was impressed with the bowl win, to be honest. They were down in that game. Indiana puts its best season together. And you're right, it's Indiana.
It's Indiana, and I was thinking like they should have smashed them from the get-go, but
I was still impressed with the way they came back in that game for sure.
Yeah. And Garrett, the thing about Pruitt, right, so fiery. And I thought he was going to lose control of that ship. The personality of Pruitt, I'm not sold on it, though, completely working.
Yeah, no, I really do completely understand where you're coming from. Just for argument's sake, I do think that, if there's going to be a year that Tennessee finally matches the preseason expectation, I do think it's finally going to be this year, where they've got at least something settled at the quarterback position. They've got a defense that can rely upon a lot of momentum in the recruiting class. So the recruiting's been off the charts. And you have Harrison Bailey coming in, and it's going to be a fun season of football in Tennessee. I think Garantano probably is not going to play. That fan base, it's just a contentious kind of relationship there. And I think
so now we're again with Garrett Jones. I want to go maybe 5 more minutes, talk about recap the rest of the SEC in college, and then Garrett, we will eventually get into a little NFL. I love keeping it mostly football. You do watch the NBA as well, so we'll get some more great stuff from you definitely in the future. But looking at the West, you mentioned how your father was a graduate of College Station. You look at Jimbo Fisher and his tenure so far. Kellen Mond's coming back. A lot of talent. They're not really that disciplined. Jimbo Fisher. What to make of Jimbo Fisher, Garrett?
Well, I think when you look at his first 2 seasons, he was able to do 2 things that Kevin Sumlin was not, his predecessor. In his first year, they win 9 games. Sumlin did that only once, and he did it with Johnny Manziel. In his second season, they go 7-5. However, they finish 8-5 with a win in a bowl game. Okay, under Sumlin, they put together 3 straight 8-5 seasons, all with a loss in a bowl game. So I think that the first 2 years under Fisher, I mean, you look at that record, solid 17-9, especially playing in the toughest division in college football. They're still recruiting well. I do think that there are tangible positive signs that Texas A&M is headed in the right direction. And this might be pushing a lot of chips to the middle of the table, but I will say, I think if it's ever going to happen for Texas A&M, I think it's going to happen next year.
This coming year.
I'm not saying it will, but I do think if it ever is going to happen for them in the West, it's going to happen this year. Now, I don't think that they'll win it, but I'm talking a second place finish, right? You look at that non-conference schedule. I mean, there is no excuse not to sweep your non-conference schedule. Finally, you get a break in the non-con. This is a team that's played Clemson back-to-back seasons. They have routinely scheduled tough in their non-conference since they joined the SEC, and more power to them. You know what I mean? Ohio State's not doing that. The ACC really isn't doing that. Their fellow SEC schools aren't doing that. More power to A&M for being willing to punch up in their non-conference slate. But Colorado at home, that's a game you should win. And then every single other game they've got in their non-conference slate is an easy win. So if they can catch lightning in a bottle and maybe beat an LSU at home, I'm not saying they will, but maybe beat an LSU at home, you should have wins over a rebuilding Mississippi team. You should have wins over, same thing with Mississippi State. You should really only lose in the SEC West your games to LSU and your games to Alabama. They've got Florida at home in the cross conference, if I'm not mistaken. No, they got Vanderbilt at home. That was another thing that made me think about that this really could be the year for Texas A&M to finish in second place in the West.
And South Carolina is on the road.
They've never lost to South Carolina since joining the SEC. They've never lost to Arkansas since joining the SEC. So let's say for the hypotheticals, we can chalk that up as automatic wins. You're really only looking at 2 losses there because of the huge break in the non-conference scheduling and getting Vanderbilt in the cross conference. So because of those 2 things, I do think A&M goes 10-2 next year. If they can somehow catch lightning in a bottle and beat LSU at home, hope that Alabama drops a game that it shouldn't, put themselves in a position to where they're either tying for first place or finishing in second place. I think it's going to happen next year or not at all. That was a very long-winded way to say it.
Oh, so you think they're going to Auburn and losing, though, at Auburn?
That's the wild card. That's the real wild card.
That's the second loss you're talking about on the plane.
Yeah, that's the second loss I'm talking about. So if obviously they lose to LSU, that's 3 losses, 3 excusable losses. A&M has played Auburn pretty well since they've joined the SEC. Those 2 have punched back and forth. I don't think they win that game on the road next year. So I think any way you slice it, A&M's got a couple of losses, but I do think if they can somehow catch lightning in a bottle and beat LSU at home, next year's the year they're going to be 10-2 and pretty much. I
think LSU was a process of Joe Brady and Joe Burrow. And I look at Coach O, and I love Coach O, and he's everything great about college sports and about the journey. But now Scott Linehan's there. Aranda's at Baylor. I think LSU with Miles Brennan, I think they're in for a rude awakening next year. Like, I think they're going to be an average 7-5 team. But you make great points. Like, it's so funny just thinking about Texas A&M in the West. But when you look at the Mississippi schools, they're in such flux. Like, I do agree Lane's going to take time. Mike Leach is fascinating because will Mike Leach
I love it so much. I love it so much.
In the physicalness of the SEC, will the Pirate, will KJ Costello, will this kind of it's a very finesse offense. Will that work at Mississippi State? And Texas A&M, it's just fascinating. Kellen Mond was supposed to have the year. We've kind of been waiting for Kellen Mond. I'm one of these guys, actually, Garrett, and you do pay attention, I could see, to recruiting. I'm one of these guys that think Haynes King could be really, really special at that position. Also, I look at the I look at Haynes King, and the defense is what's really going to be it for Texas A&M. But Haynes King versus Kellen Mond, that could be fascinating.
Yeah, I do think that. And you look at Mond statistically, he gets a lot. He gets wrapped on a lot because of his play. Statistically, last year, 25 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. That's a really, really strong TD-INT ratio. So that's another reason why I do think that they could finish in second in the West. I think that if he's going to put up that 30 touchdown season, contend for SEC Offensive Player of the Year, it's going to be next year. Obviously, he's a senior. I think that plays a lot into their advantage. But yeah, I do agree with you. I think that King is a good long-term option for Texas A&M. I think that they will look for ways to kind of input him in those games. Like I said, you've got a relatively easy non-conference schedule, some great opportunities to get some experience, especially with the new redshirt rule. So I completely agree with you there.
10-2. Here's the thing about Jimbo and Texas A&M, which is fun. Now I know that your dad went to Texas A&M, so maybe this will ruffle some feathers again, but that's what's fun about a podcast. I look at Texas A&M, and just ever since Jimbo Fisher, the expectations, I think, have just been kind of insane at Texas A&M. And I think that Jimbo, if they go 10-2, they lose a bowl game, I think it'll be like Jim Harbaugh. I actually think Texas A&M fans, they won't even be content with that. And I'm not even the biggest Jimbo fan, but I think A&M, the money that they bring into Texas A&M at College Station, in basketball, Buzz Williams, and all the pressure that I think Buzz is going to put on football, because I think Buzz is pound for pound. I think Texas A&M is going to be headed towards Elite Eight success pretty soon. So I think even 10-2, if you're Texas A&M, I think that is a very good year. But for Jimbo, the amount of money they're paying him, there is a ton of pressure for Jimbo, though, to really compete against Alabama for the West and make those strides.
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt about that. Ever since the day that he walked on campus, there were going to be heavy expectations heaped on him, and understandably so, right? You got 75 million reasons why. And, that makes total sense. And we'll see how he adapts to that next year. But, yeah, I do think that your third season is the point. You look at basketball or football, your third season is the point where, okay, let's see what we've got here. The rubber's going to meet the road in one shape or the other.
Garrett Jones, it was a ton of fun. My friend, I want to thank you for coming on. Rover Sports going to put this out on YouTube tonight. Some absolute great clips about Missouri sports. Drew Lock analysis went on a while, and it was a ton of fun, Garrett. First podcast, and I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Thanks, brother. I'm glad everything worked out. Let's just pile them on, all right?
Absolutely. That's Garrett Jones, and thank you guys for watching.